Welcome to another episode of the Quip Corners Book Corner. My guest has been here before, so please join us and let's do this. Yeah, of course, you'll see her bio right after this as well. See you in the Quip Corner. Welcome back to the Quip Corners Book Corner, Mrs. Anna.
Always good to be back. And I do appreciate the fact that you invite me back. Sometimes I end up sharing some of the same poems, but because they continue to speak to me, and there just may be someone who was not on the last time, comes this time for the first time, or someone who was here before has come back because they want to hear some of the same poems and hear your questions about them. And some people know that April is Poetry Month because it also happens to be the birthday of William Shakespeare. History has it that he was born 23rd or 24th of April.
Yeah.
And during this time, many teachers intentionally focus on teaching Shakespeare as a writer, but also his poetry. And when I was a classroom teacher, that was one of the things that I used to do as well. And my students always want to know, why are we studying that old man? And, from so far back. And I said, good writing reflects life. Times change, people don't. The language may change, but the situations between human beings tend to remain pretty much the same. And so one of the things I do invite the students to do is to look at a piece of writing that we have been reading together as a class. Think about something contemporary that this may be talking about. And because I also happen to be a National Writing Project Fellow, that means I was taught to write with my students. I would also write with them. And so two of the poems I'd like to begin with today talk about my response to reading students' poetry, and then a couple of poems that I wrote because I asked them to write. And so if they have to do it, I have to do it. So may I begin with the one called Words, Words, Words?
Okay.
And I would appreciate it if you would read it with me. It's on page 10.
Okay.
In this collection, Experience Poems and Pictures.
Yeah.
And it's designed to invite students to look at paintings and let the paintings inspire their writing, but also look at the words and see what images, visualizations they get as they read. All right. Words, words, words. Words stir me when I hear them, when I read them, when I write them, when I speak them.
Words urge me to keep listening, to keep reading, to keep writing, to keep speaking.
Let me hear you so I can know you. Let me speak so you can know me.
Why don't you take the last one? Why don't you just finish it up? Yeah?
Prodigiously stirring words help me know you, but viscerally urging words help me know me. And this is one of the reasons that I encourage students, adults, teens, kids to write, because writing helps us know ourselves. Some of you have read the expression that when I see what I wrote, I see what I meant or what I think. And so we encourage listeners, viewers, to write. You may not choose to write poetry, but I encourage you to try it. And one of the times we were reading Romeo and Juliet, the students, of course, like the movie that has been made, about Romeo and Juliet. I said, shows you right there. That's a contemporary story.
Yeah.
And one of the times I said, but they also talk about the ways that people are interacting today.
Mm-hmm.
And so one of them was asking the kids to consider a contemporary story. And one of them was called um, a rap. The students were talking about raps. And
Okay.
so I don't really rap, but I can write about a rap. And so I wrote one called Romeo Rap, Timeless and Timely. And here it is, page 42.
Yeah. Getting there in mind.
You want to read this one together?
Sure.
Let's do it. Cruising nightly with our homies, hanging out much too late, getting into so much trouble just because of hate.
Reverend Joe, he's a minister walking around our hood, warning us not to act so sinister, saying we should be good.
Get your learning, he would tell us. Each of you could be earning more than you think you could, more than you thought you would. Now, let's get going like you should. You're saying, don't be hanging with your crew, doing what you should not do, staying out much too late, attracting trouble because of hate. Come on, Knights, he keeps on coaching. Come on, Knights, he keeps cajoling. Time to neutralize that hate. Spread some good. It's not too late.
It's time to neutralize that hate. Let's spread some good. It's not too late.
Okay. And so as we looked at that one, and some of the students live in communities where that's what they do, hang out with their crew. And so as we looked at the play Romeo and Juliet and considered some issues that they are faced with, reminding them that there are many church communities that have part of their ministry someone who's out there giving the same advice. It's time to put your learning to work. And so that's one of the other ways that we use poetry doing Poetry Month, not just to write in rhyme and rhythm, but to reflect on life as the
Mm.
students are experiencing it. One of the things that we do is we ask them to consider poets that they like or have heard about. And during Black History Month, one of the times we invited students to consider a poet of African American descent. Who was this person? What did this person write about? And if you could talk to that person, what would that person say to you? And that's where we came up with the poem of What Phillis Wheatley Would Tell Me. And that's on page 22. And as you're turning to that, question I ask my students, I'll ask you and those who are watching today. Who was Phillis Wheatley?
I know the answer to that question, but I'm going to save my answer because we've had this conversation.
Okay. Phillis Wheatley, some of your newbies may recognize her name. She happened to have been brought to the United States as an 8-year-old girl.
Mm-hmm.
She was housed for a while by a family in Massachusetts. And because she became ill while she was on the ship, she wasn't put to work right away. But she was named after the ship, Phyllis. And as she was recovering, she sat in on lessons and she learned other languages, Latin and Greek and French. And she also learned classical poetry and was published. And people began to challenge her. How could you write like this? I don't believe you're doing it. You're writing someone else's. This was before AI.
Yeah.
And so they assumed,
Now that's a different challenge.
all right, that she was writing. And so this particular time, I said, you know what? If I were to go back in history,
Mhm.
I'd like to talk to Phyllis Wheatley to find out how she learned that many different languages and why she began to write poetry. And this is what she told me. When they challenge your intellect, girl, fight back.
When they say you didn't write that, I said, really? What does it lack?
They shouted right back, it's because you're black. Blacks can't write like that.
Oh, yeah? I said, maybe not just like that. Watch my smoke. You better stay woke, because I'm not through with you or with you.
I kept on writing, and I hope you do too.
They'll believe when they see your intellect shine through. That melanin is only a color of skin, not indicative at all of what you can do.
So just keep on writing. And when you're through, they'll have to acknowledge what you truly did do.
Do.
And so as we celebrate Poetry Month, we celebrate not only what we have written ourselves,
Mm-hmm.
but also what our students write. What are they saying? What are they showing when they choose particular topics?
Mm-hmm.
And of course, we invite them to write about people that they know and people who have influenced them in some personal way. And that's one of the reasons I often end up writing about my grandmother. And sometimes I even write about my husband. And we encourage students, if you've written a poem that really surprised you with the contents and let you know that you really had someone that you appreciate,
Yeah.
go ahead and
Sure.
refine and polish that poem and give it as a gift.
Right.
Um, it's something you've done, and it probably will please someone in a
Mm-hmm.
way that something more expensive and disposable just won't. And
Yeah.
so poetry is time to write about what we know, a time to show what we're learning,
Mm-hmm.
but it's also a time to show who we're loving. And
Yes.
that's one of the reasons we invite students to read poetry, to write poetry, and to share their
Good.
poems.
Wow. Well, thank you. Thank you so much for joining me to share poems from your book and the stories behind them. I really, really appreciate it, Mrs. R.
I'd like to ask you one last question.
Yes.
As you were looking through this book,
Yeah.
poems and pictures,
Mm-hmm.
was there a particular poem that stood out for you or spoke to you that we can read as we close our time together?
Ooh, that was, I need to remember because I think it was, it's actually been a while since I read this. And I
Okay.
remember, did I tick them off?
Well,
Let me see. Let me see if I can pull it up very quickly. If not,
okay.
I wonder if it's the heart tree.
Could have been.
It may have been, well, I know that heart tree may have been one of the ones I liked, the first time I went through the book.
Then let's do this last one then on page 14 called Acquainted with That Song.
Okay.
Many of your viewers are familiar with Robert Frost, an American poet who wrote a song called Acquainted with That Night. And
Mhm.
one of the things we encourage our students to do is to pattern or model the structure of a poem of someone who has become famous, but write it about something that you know.
Okay.
And one time during my career as a classroom teacher, I had an opportunity to do a teacher exchange where I was in Africa. I was visited Kenya and Uganda. And when I was in Mombasa, the host had a going away party. And they asked each of us to share with them something special that occurred to them. And when I got up to speak, it happened to be night. And I looked up at the sky and I said, I could be standing under the same stars and sky that my ancestors did. But I have no idea because my ancestors have been in the United States for at least since my great grandmother. But some of the music I heard made me think of it. And this is the poem that I wrote is about that. It's modeling the sonnet format of Robert Frost, but it's about a personal experience.
Okay.
I have been one acquainted with that song. I've sung that song in tune and out of tune. I have held that high note, oh, so long. I have sung that song clear like a loon. I have kept within the music's beat, swooped down low, yet staying right in tune. I've sung that song and let my voice just soar, while deep within my soul, the words brought tears that slipped down my cheeks. My heart just tore. That song reminding me of trials sore, experienced by people who did so long for freedom, justice, rights, and so much more. The freedoms they waited so long. I have been one acquainted with that song.
Nice. Nice. Oh, thank you. Thank you once again for joining me in the Quip Corners Book Corner. And for all those who don't know, these books are available on Amazon.
Yes,
And they
are.
come in how many languages again?
Thank you for asking. The questions at the end, we call the reflections, are now in 4 languages.
Ooh, nice.
In English, which I wrote, in Spanish, which a Spanish teacher wrote, in French, which one of my French teachers wrote, and in German, written by a woman I met online and told her about the book. And she says, I'd like to have this for my grandmother. I said, well, I don't know German. She says, well, I'm from Switzerland and we speak some German. And so she got one of her friends to translate the reflection section into German. So whatever language you speak, if you are watching the show, you probably know some English, you'll probably be okay. But if you're more comfortable in French, German, or Spanish, we invite you to get those translations.
Nice, nice. Oh, thank you. Thanks again, Mrs. R.
Thank you.
See you around.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye now. Always a pleasure having Mrs. R. I call her Miss Anna, Mrs. R. I call her different names. She's so sweet. It's always a pleasure having her in the Quip Corner with me. Well, this is a book you should consider. Like all the books I feature, right? I look forward to reading your comments and maybe you'll share a poem or two with us. Well, you take care. God bless you. Bye now.